The war had been going on for 7 years. 7 long years of death and fighting and blood spilled across the stars. The Terran Alliance, humanity's united military force, had been locked in combat with the Krell Dominion since the day humans first encountered them at the edge of explored space. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Defender, and watched the stars through the viewport. His powered armor covered every inch of his body, as it had for the past 3 years. He rarely took it off anymore. There was always another battle, another crisis, another reason to stay ready. Jake was known throughout the fleet as the Iron Wall. He had never lost a major engagement. He had never retreated from a fight. His ship and his fleet held the Epsilon Reach, a narrow corridor of space that served as the gateway to human territory. 3 times the Krell had tried to break through. 3 times Jake had stopped them. But victories came with a price. Jake had sent thousands of soldiers to their deaths. He had made the hard choices that commanders must make in war. He had sacrificed small ships to save larger ones. He had ordered troops to hold impossible positions while others escaped. He had done everything a good commander was supposed to do. The other officers respected him. The soldiers trusted him. The enemy feared him. But Jake felt hollow inside, like something important had been carved out of him and replaced with cold steel. Today was different, though. Today, Lieutenant Commander Kate Sullivan was arriving on his ship. Kate had been Jake's fiancée before the war started. They had met at the Naval Academy, fallen in love during their first deep space assignment, and planned to marry after their tours of duty ended. Then the Krell invaded and everything changed. They had been assigned to different fleets, sent to different corners of the war. For 7 years, they had maintained their relationship through video messages and brief meetings during leave. But the distance had taken its toll. Their conversations had grown shorter, colder, more formal. The warmth they once shared had frozen under the weight of the war. Jake had requested her transfer 6 months ago. Command had finally approved it. She would serve as his tactical officer, the position she had trained for. They would be together again, working side by side. Jake hoped it would fix whatever had broken between them. The transport ship docked with the Defender. Jake waited in the hangar bay, still wearing his armor. He watched as Kate stepped off the ship carrying a single bag. She looked older than he remembered. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her dark hair was shorter now, cut in the practical military style most officers preferred. "Kate," Jake said, his voice coming through the armor's speakers. She looked at him and something flickered in her eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or sadness. "Hello, Jake. Still wearing that thing, I see." "It's standard protocol in combat zones," he replied. "We're not in combat right now," she said quietly. Jake didn't have an answer for that. They walked through the ship in silence. He showed her to her quarters, went over her duty schedule, and briefed her on the tactical situation. Everything was professional and correct. Everything was wrong. That evening, Jake went to her quarters. He had finally taken off his armor and wore his regular uniform. He knocked on her door and waited. Kate opened it. She looked surprised to see him without the armor. "I almost forgot what you looked like," she said. "Can we talk?" Jake asked. She stepped aside and let him in. Her quarters were still mostly empty. She hadn't unpacked much. Jake wondered if she was planning to stay. "I'm glad you're here," Jake started. "I know things have been difficult between us, but I thought if we were together again—" "You thought what, Jake? That we could just go back to how things were?" Kate's voice was sharp. "That was 7 years ago. We're different people now. I know that. But we can figure this out. We can make it work." Kate laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Can we? Do you even remember the last real conversation we had? Not a tactical briefing, not a status report, a real conversation about anything other than the war?" Jake tried to think back. He couldn't remember. "The war takes up a lot of time and energy." "The war takes up everything for you," Kate interrupted. "Every thought, every moment. You live in that armor, Jake. You sleep in it. You probably dream in it. I do what I have to do. I'm responsible for thousands of lives. I can't afford to be careless or weak." "Is that what you think taking off your armor means? That you're weak?" Kate shook her head. "That's exactly the problem. You've forgotten how to be human." Jake felt anger rising in his chest. "That's not fair. You weren't at the Battle of New Horizon. You didn't see what I saw. You didn't have to make the choices I made. You're right. I wasn't there. But I've been in my own battles, Jake. I've seen people die. I've made hard choices too. The difference is that I can still feel it. I can still cry about it. I can still remember that those were people, not just numbers in a casualty report. You think I don't feel anything? Jake's voice rose. You think this is easy for me? I think you've turned yourself into a machine, Kate said quietly. And I think you did it on purpose because it was easier than feeling the pain. They stared at each other. Jake wanted to argue, to defend himself, to make her understand. But he couldn't find the words. I read your after-action reports, Kate continued. The Battle of New Horizon. You sacrificed 3,000 people to save the fleet. The report was cold, clinical, perfect. You listed the tactical advantages gained, the strategic value of the position held, the estimated enemy casualties. But nowhere in that report did you mention the names of the soldiers who died. Nowhere did you acknowledge that 3,000 families would be getting death notifications. I sent personal messages to every family, Jake said. Did you write them yourself or did you use the standard template? Jake didn't answer. He had used the template. There were too many families, not enough time. The template ensured everyone got notified quickly. Kate's expression softened, but it was worse than her anger. It was pity. You're not human anymore, Jake. You're just a machine wearing human skin. You don't feel anything. You can't? And I don't know why I ever loved a man who could send thousands to their deaths and sleep soundly at night. The words hit Jake harder than any weapon. He took a step back as if she had physically struck him. I came here thinking maybe we could save what we had, Kate continued. But there's nothing left to save. The man I loved died somewhere in this war. You're just what's left behind. Jake tried to speak, but his throat felt tight. Kate, please, the Krell were right about one thing, she said, her voice cold now. Humanity doesn't belong in the stars. We're just bringing our violence to a larger stage. And you, Jake Morrison, you are the worst of us. You're what we become when we forget why we're fighting in the first place. That's not true, Jake managed to say. Isn't it? When was the last time you thought about peace? When was the last time you considered any option other than fighting? You've become so good at war that you've forgotten what it's like to be anything else. Jake stood there, unable to form a response. Everything she said felt like acid eating through his defenses. I'm requesting a transfer, Kate said. Effective immediately. I can't serve under you. I can't even look at you without seeing all the humanity we've lost in this war. Request approved, Jake heard himself say. His voice sounded distant, mechanical. Just like she said, Kate nodded once. Goodbye, Jake. I hope someday you remember who you used to be. But I won't be here to see it. She turned away from him, facing the wall. The conversation was over. Jake left her quarters and walked through the empty corridors of his ship. Soldiers saluted as he passed. He returned their salutes automatically. When he reached his own quarters, Jake stood in front of the mirror. Without his armor, he looked small and tired. There were scars on his arms from the few times the armor had failed. There were circles under his eyes from too little sleep. He looked at himself and tried to see the man Kate had loved. He couldn't find him. All he saw was a soldier, a commander, a weapon. Maybe she was right. Maybe he had become a machine. And maybe that was exactly what the war needed. But it wasn't what Kate needed. It wasn't what he needed either. Jake sat down heavily on his bunk. For the first time in 3 years, he let himself feel the weight of everything he had done. Every order given, every life spent, every choice made. The pain was overwhelming, crushing, impossible to bear. And in that moment, something inside Jake Morrison broke. Not his discipline, not his training, but something deeper, something fundamental. The man who had been the iron wall felt his foundations crack. He didn't know it yet, but Kate's words had started something that couldn't be stopped. They had planted a question in his mind that demanded an answer. What was he fighting for? And was there any part of the real Jake Morrison left to save? Kate Sullivan left the Defender the next morning. Jake didn't go to see her off. He told himself it was because he had duties to attend to, but the truth was simpler. He couldn't face her again, not after what she had said, not after she had held up a mirror and forced him to see what he had become. Commander Lisa Grant was Jake's second in command. She had served with him for 4 years and knew him better than anyone else on the ship. She found him on the bridge at 300 hours, staring at tactical displays that showed nothing but empty space. Captain, you should get some rest, Lisa said carefully. I'm fine, Jake replied. His voice was flat, empty of emotion. Lisa didn't believe him, but she knew better than to push. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan's transfer went through. She's on her way to the rear echelon support fleet. Good. That's where she'll be safer. Sir, if you need to talk about anything. I don't. Jake turned back to the displays. Dismissed, Commander. Lisa hesitated, then left. But she made a note in her personal log. Something was wrong with the captain. She had seen soldiers break before. It always started like this. The silence. The withdrawal. The empty eyes. Over the next few days, Jake threw himself into his work. He reviewed every system on the ship. He inspected the fleet personally, visiting each vessel and speaking with every captain. He ran combat drills until the crews were exhausted. He was everywhere, doing everything, never stopping, never resting. But at night, alone in his quarters, Jake did something he hadn't done in years. He read through the casualty reports. Not the summary numbers, the actual reports. The names, the ranks, the ages, the home planets, the families left behind. Private First Class Danny Cruz, age 19, from Earth. Killed in action during the Second Battle of Epsilon Reach. Survived by his mother and two younger sisters. Ensign Maria Gonzalez, age 23, from Mars Colony. Killed when her fighter was destroyed covering the retreat of larger ships. Survived by her husband and infant daughter. Lieutenant Commander Aaron Bennett, age 35, from Europa Station. Died when his ship's reactor was breached. Survived by his parents and his partner of 12 years. Jake read every name, every story. There were thousands of them. He had signed off on the death notifications for every single one. He had written the standard message of condolence. He had moved on to the next battle. For the first time, Jake let himself imagine the people behind the names. The mother who would never see her son graduate from the academy. The daughter who would grow up without knowing her mother. The partner who would spend the rest of his life alone. Jake had told himself that their sacrifices mattered. That they had died for something important, for humanity, for survival, for the future. But now Kate's words echoed in his mind. What were they really dying for? Territory, pride? The inability of two civilizations to stop killing each other? On the 5th day after Kate left, Jake received a message from Fleet Command. Intelligence had detected a massive Krell buildup near the Epsilon Reach. Long-range sensors showed a fleet of unprecedented size gathering just beyond the border. They were preparing for a final assault. Jake called a meeting of all senior officers. They gathered in the conference room, 15 men and women who had fought beside him for years. They trusted him completely. They believed he could work miracles. Intelligence estimates the Krell fleet at over 300 ships, Jake began. They outnumber us 5-1. They have heavier weapons, better shields, and more troops. They're planning to break through here and push straight to the core systems. The officers exchanged glances. Everyone knew what this meant. Fleet Command is sending reinforcements, Jake continued. But they won't arrive for 6 days. We need to hold for 6 days against an enemy that vastly outnumbers us. We've held before, sir, said Commander Grant. Not against odds like this, Jake replied. Command has authorized a tactical retreat if the situation becomes untenable. We can fall back to the secondary defense line and regroup with the reinforcements. That would mean abandoning Epsilon Reach, objected Commander Ryan Hughes, captain of the destroyer Vanguard. We'd be giving them a straight shot at the colony worlds. Better to fight from a stronger position than die in a losing battle, Jake said. The room fell silent. This wasn't like Captain Morrison. The Iron Wall didn't talk about retreat. He didn't calculate acceptable losses and strategic withdrawals. He held the line no matter what. Sir, are you saying we should abandon our position? Asked Captain Nicole Freeman of the cruiser Steadfast. Jake looked at her. She was 32 years old. She had a wife and a son back on Earth. If Jake ordered her to hold Epsilon Reach, she would do it. She would fight until her ship was destroyed and she was killed. She wouldn't even question the order. I'm saying we need to think carefully about what we're willing to sacrifice, Jake replied. Every ship we lose here is a ship that can't defend the core systems. Every soldier who dies here is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's love. The officers stared at him. This definitely wasn't like Captain Morrison. We'll review defensive positions and prepare contingency plans, Jake said. Meeting dismissed. As the officers filed out, Commander Grant lingered behind. Sir, what's going on? You're not yourself. Maybe I'm finally becoming myself again, Jake said quietly. I don't understand. Neither do I. Lisa, not yet. Jake looked at the tactical display showing the approaching Krell fleet. But I'm starting to ask questions I should have asked a long time ago. That night, Jake did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He took off his armor, not just for a few minutes. He removed it completely and sealed it in its maintenance bay. Then he stripped down to his basic uniform and looked at himself in the mirror again. Without the armor, he looked human, fragile, small, vulnerable. Kate's words came back to him. You're just a machine wearing human skin. But machines didn't feel pain. Machines didn't question orders. Machines didn't lie awake at night thinking about the thousands of people they had sent to die. Jake was feeling all of those things, which meant he wasn't a machine. Not completely. Not yet. He pulled up the personnel files of every soldier in his fleet. 10,000 men and women. 10,000 lives depending on his decisions. He looked at their faces. Read their service records. Learned their stories. Petty Officer Carlos Martinez loved to paint. He sent watercolors home to his daughter every month. Engineer third class Amy Lynn played the violin. She organized concerts on her ship to boost morale. Lieutenant Derek Chen was studying xenobiology in his spare time. He wanted to understand alien life, not just fight it. These weren't statistics. These weren't acceptable losses. These were people with dreams and hopes and families and futures. Jake spent the entire night reading. When Commander Grant found him the next morning, he was still at his desk, surrounded by holographic displays showing faces and files and stories. Captain, you haven't slept, Lisa said. I'm fine, Jake replied automatically. Then he stopped himself. Actually, no, I'm not fine. I haven't been fine for a long time. Lisa pulled up a chair and sat down. Talk to me. Jake gestured at the displays. Do you know any of these people personally? Some of them. Why? I've been their commander for years and I don't know them at all. I know their ranks and their positions and their combat effectiveness ratings, but I don't know them as people. You can't know everyone personally, sir. The fleet is too large, I know. But I should at least try. I should at least care. Jake closed his eyes. Kate told me I'd become a machine. She was right. I turned myself into something cold and hard, because I thought that's what a commander needed to be. But somewhere along the way I forgot that the purpose of being a commander is to protect people, not to spend them like ammunition. Lisa was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. But I know I can't keep fighting the same way. I can't keep trading lives for territory and calling it victory. The war won't stop just because you want it to. Lisa pointed out. I know. Jake opened his eyes and looked at the tactical display showing the incoming Krell fleet. But maybe there's another way. Maybe there's a way to end this that doesn't involve thousands more people dying. If such a way existed, someone would have found it by now. Maybe no one was desperate enough to look. Jake stood up and walked to the viewport. The stars looked different to him now, less like a battlefield and more like what they actually were, distant suns with their own worlds and their own people. The Krell are people too, Jake said suddenly. That's what we forget. We call them aliens, enemies, monsters. But they're people. They have families. They have hopes. They have reasons for fighting that make sense to them. They invaded our space, sir. They started this war, did they? Or did we expand into territory they considered theirs? Jake shook his head. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that both sides are dying for something that neither side can clearly explain. We're locked in a cycle of violence and revenge and neither civilization knows how to stop. Lisa stood up and joined him at the viewport. You're talking about peace. But the Krell don't want peace. They want conquest, do they? Or is that just what we tell ourselves to justify continuing the war? Jake turned to face her. I'm going to find out. I'm going to find a way to talk to them. To really talk, not just exchange threats and demands. Command would never approve that. I know. Jake smiled, but it was sad and tired. Which is why I'm not going to ask for permission. Lisa's eyes widened. Sir, what are you planning? Something insane. Something desperate. Something that will either end this war or end me. Jake put a hand on her shoulder. I need you to trust me, Lisa. Can you do that? She looked at him for a long moment. The man standing in front of her wasn't the Iron Wall. He wasn't the invincible commander who never lost. He was just Jake Morrison, a tired soldier trying to find a way to stop the dying. I trust you, sir, Lisa said quietly. Good. Because in about 48 hours I'm going to need you to take command of this fleet. What are you going to do? Jake looked back at the stars. I'm going to walk into the enemy fleet alone and unarmed and ask them if they're willing to try something different. They'll kill you. Maybe, but maybe not. The Krell value courage above everything else. If I show them that humans can be brave without armor and weapons, maybe they'll listen. That's crazy. Yes, Jake agreed. But staying here and fighting a battle we can't win is crazy too. At least my way, only one person has to die instead of thousands. Lisa wanted to argue, to talk him out of it, to find some other solution. But looking at Jake's face, she knew his mind was made up. Something fundamental had changed in him. The iron wall had cracked, and what emerged from the rubble was someone willing to sacrifice himself if it meant others might live. Tell me what you need me to do, Lisa said finally, and Jake began to explain his plan. The Krell fleet arrived exactly when intelligence predicted. 300 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Epsilon Reach. They were massive vessels, each one larger than the biggest human ships. Their hulls were dark and jagged, covered in organic-looking armor that seemed to shift and move in the light. On the bridge of the Defender, the tactical displays lit up with red warning indicators. Every officer watched in silence as the enemy fleet assembled into battle formation. This was the largest force the Krell had ever committed to a single engagement. All ships report ready, sir, Commander Grant said quietly. She looked pale but calm. Defensive positions established. Weapons charged. We're as ready as we'll ever be. Jake stood at his command station, but he wasn't wearing his armor. For the first time in years, he faced a battle in just his regular uniform. The other officers had noticed, but no one commented. They assumed he would put it on before the fighting started. How long until they're in weapons range? Jake asked. 18 minutes, sir. Jake nodded slowly. 18 minutes. That was all the time he had left to make this work. If it didn't, thousands of people were about to die. Including him. Open a fleet-wide channel, Jake ordered. Channel open, sir. Jake took a deep breath. This was it. The moment everything changed or everything ended. This is Captain Jake Morrison to all ships. What I'm about to do is not an order. It's my choice alone. Commander Lisa Grant is hereby promoted to acting Captain of the Defender and Fleet Commander of all Terran forces at Epsilon. Reach. You will follow her orders without question. He could see the confusion on the faces around him. Lisa looked at him with worry in her eyes. I want everyone to understand something, Jake continued. You are the best fleet in the Terran Alliance. You've fought bravely and well. You've never given up, never surrendered, never backed down from a fight. I'm proud to have served with you. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But today I'm asking you not to fight. Not yet. Not unless you have no other choice. I'm going to try something that might seem crazy. I'm going to try to end this war without firing a shot. If I fail, if the Krell attack anyway, then you fight with everything you have. But give me a chance first. Give peace a chance. The bridge was silent. Every eye was on Jake. Commander Grant has her orders. Follow them. Protect each other. And remember that the point of all this fighting was never to kill the enemy. It was to protect the people we love. Sometimes protecting them means finding a way to stop the killing. Jake looked around the bridge one last time. Morrison out. He closed the channel and turned to Lisa. The fleet is yours, Commander. Follow the plan we discussed. Don't fire unless they fire first. Don't break formation. And if this doesn't work, get everyone out of here alive. Sir, please don't do this, Lisa said quietly. I have to. Jake smiled at her. Someone has to try something different. Might as well be me. He walked to the hangar bay. Behind him, he could hear Lisa taking command, her voice steady and strong. The crew would be in good hands. In the hangar bay, a single-occupant transport pod waited. It was the smallest ship in the fleet, barely more than a cockpit with an engine. Unarmed, unarmored, designed for short trips between ships, not for approaching enemy fleets. Jake climbed inside and sealed the hatch. The cockpit was cramped and the controls were basic. He had trained on these pods during his academy days but hadn't flown one in years. It would have to be good enough. He launched from the Defender and pointed the pod toward the Krell fleet. Through the small viewport, he could see the enemy ships growing larger as he approached. They looked like predators, all sharp edges and weapons bristling from every surface. Jake activated the communications system and began broadcasting on every frequency he could access. He spoke in English and Krell battle tongue that he had learned from captured transmissions. and in the 6 other major languages used in this part of the galaxy. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Terran Alliance. I am unarmed. I am unarmored. I am alone. I request an audience with your fleet commander. I believe there is a way to end this war today. I ask only that you hear me out before making any decisions. He repeated the message over and over as his pod crossed the empty space between the 2 fleets. On both sides, weapons tracked his movement. One shot from either side would vaporize his tiny ship instantly. Inside the Krell flagship, War Master Theknor received the transmission with surprise bordering on shock. In 7 years of warfare, no human had ever done anything like this. Humans fought to the death. They never surrendered. They never asked for mercy. They certainly never flew alone into the heart of an enemy fleet. Theknor was old by Krell standards. His carapace bore the scars of hundreds of battles fought over nearly 2 centuries. He had commanded fleets when humans were still confined to their home star system. He had studied them carefully since first contact. They were fascinating in their weakness and their strength. Humans died easily. Their bodies were soft, unarmored, vulnerable to injury and disease. They needed machines to survive in space, to fight in battles, to accomplish anything of significance. By all rights, they should have been conquered in the first month of the war, but they hadn't been. Because humans possessed something the Krell had never encountered before. They called it stubbornness. Humans refused to accept defeat. They would fight losing battles just to delay the enemy. They would sacrifice themselves for strangers. They would keep getting back up no matter how many times they were knocked down. Theknor respected that. He had come to see humans as worthy opponents. This war had been the greatest challenge of his long career, and now one of them was flying toward his fleet alone. It was either the greatest act of courage Theknor had ever witnessed or the greatest act of foolishness. "Bring him aboard," Theknor commanded, "but be ready to destroy his ship if this is a trick." Jake felt his pod being caught by a tractor beam. The Krell flagship pulled him in like a fish on a line. He tried to stay calm, but his heart was racing. This was really happening. He was about to meet the enemy face to face with no armor, no weapons, no protection of any kind. The pod was pulled into a massive hangar bay. Through the viewport, Jake could see Krell warriors assembling. There were dozens of them, all in full combat armor, all carrying weapons that could tear him apart in seconds. The tractor beam lowered his pod to the deck and released it. Jake took a moment to steady his breathing. Then he unsealed the hatch and climbed out. The Krell warriors surrounded him immediately. Up close, they were terrifying. Each one stood at least 7 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in natural armor plating that looked like dark metal but was actually living tissue. They had 4 arms, each ending in claws that could slice through steel. Their heads were elongated and insectoid, with compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Jake stood in the center of the circle, acutely aware of how small and fragile he appeared to them. He wore no armor. He carried no weapons. He had nothing but his uniform and his words. One of the Krell stepped forward. This one was larger than the others and covered in battle scars. His armor was decorated with symbols that Jake recognized as rank markers. This had to be their leader. "I am War Master Theknor," the Krell said in heavily accented human standard. His voice was harsh and clicking like rocks grinding together. "You are either very brave or very stupid, human." "Captain Jake Morrison," Jake replied, keeping his voice steady. "And probably both." Theknor made a sound that might have been laughter. "The Iron Wall, I know your name. You have killed many of my warriors. You have stopped 3 major assaults on this position. You are a formidable enemy." "I didn't come here as an enemy," Jake said. "I came here as someone who's tired of watching people die for no good reason. We have good reasons for fighting. You invaded territory that belongs to the Dominion. We explored space that we believed was unclaimed. When we encountered your borders, we were willing to negotiate. Your response was to attack our ships and colonies. Because humans are dangerous. You spread like a disease. You consume resources. You make war wherever you go. We have seen this pattern before with other species. Better to stop you now than face you later when you are stronger." Jake wanted to argue, to defend humanity, to explain that they weren't like that, but he knew it wouldn't help. Both sides had their justifications. Both sides believed they were right. That's why the war had gone on for 7 years with no end in sight. "You're right," Jake said instead. Theknor's eyes flickered with surprise. "Humans can be dangerous. We do spread quickly. We do fight. We're aggressive and stubborn, and sometimes we don't know when to stop. But we're also capable of change. We're capable of learning, and we're capable of choosing peace over victory. Pretty words, Thecnor said. But words mean nothing in war. Only strength matters. Only victory matters. Is that true? After 7 years of fighting, what have either of us won? Jake gestured to the hangar around them. You have a bigger fleet, better weapons, stronger warriors. You could probably break through our lines and push toward the human core worlds. But then what? We would fight you every step of the way. Every planet, every station, every ship. We would never surrender. We would make you pay for every inch of space in blood. We know this. We accept it. That is the price of war. But why? Jake stepped closer to the War Master. The other Krell tensed, ready to strike if he made any threatening move. Why keep paying that price? Your warriors die too. They have families. They have lives they could be living instead of dying in empty space. Same as humans. We're not so different when you think about it. We are nothing like you, Thecnor said, but there was less certainty in his voice. We're both intelligent species trying to survive and protect our people. We both value courage and strength. We both honor our warriors who fall in battle. The only real difference is that we haven't figured out how to coexist yet. Thecnor was silent for a long moment, studying Jake with his compound eyes. What exactly are you proposing, Captain Morrison? A challenge, Jake said. I want to invoke the Technora. The hangar bay erupted in clicking and whistling sounds. The Krell warriors were talking among themselves, clearly agitated. Thecnor raised one of his forearms and they fell silent. You know of the Technora? Thecnor asked carefully. I've studied your culture. I know that the Technora allows disputes to be settled through single combat when the cost of continued war becomes too high. I'm invoking that right. One human against one Krell. If I win, your fleet withdraws and we begin peace negotiations. If I lose, my fleet surrenders and you take Epsilon Reach. The Technora has not been used in over 200 years. It is considered an ancient practice, a relic of a more barbaric time. But it's still part of your code. It's still binding. Thecnor studied Jake for another long moment. You understand that you would be fighting unarmed. No weapons, no armor, no technology. I understand. You would die. Humans are weak, soft. You have no natural armor, no claws, no strength to match a Krell warrior. It would not even be a fair fight. Then you have nothing to lose by accepting, Jake replied. Either way you win. But this way you win with honor. You prove once and for all that Krell warriors are superior, and you do it while losing only one warrior instead of thousands. It was the perfect trap and Thecnor knew it. If he refused, he would appear cowardly in front of his warriors. The Krell valued courage above all else. A war master who refused a direct challenge would lose the respect of his fleet. But if he accepted and the humans somehow won, the war would be over. Thecnor would have to honor the Technora and withdraw. 7 years of fighting would end with a single defeat. The smart choice was to refuse and simply kill the human. But that wasn't the Krell way. That wasn't honorable. I accept your challenge, Thecnor said finally. The news of the challenge spread through both fleets like wildfire. On the human ships, soldiers gathered around communication screens in disbelief. Their commander, the Iron Wall himself, was going to fight a Krell warrior hand to hand, without armor, without weapons. It seemed like suicide. On the Krell flagship, warriors assembled in the main combat arena. This was an ancient space, built into the heart of the ship specifically for ritual combat. The floor was made of dark metal scarred by centuries of use. The walls were lined with viewing platforms where the entire crew could watch. Jake stood at the edge of the arena, watching as Krell warriors filed in to fill the viewing platforms. There had to be thousands of them, all clicking and whistling to each other in their own language. He couldn't understand most of it, but he could sense their mood. They were excited, eager. This was entertainment for them. A chance to see a human crushed. Commander Lisa Grant managed to establish a video link with the Krell flagship. On the bridge of the Defender, she and the other officers watched in horror as Jake prepared for the fight. Sir, please don't do this, Lisa said through the communication link. We can still fight. We can still find another way. Jake could see her on a small display screen. She looked terrified for him. This is the other way, Lisa, trust me. You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe, but if I do, at least only one person dies instead of thousands. That's a trade I'm willing to make. We're not willing to make it, Lisa said, her voice breaking slightly. You're important to us. To the fleet. To everyone. That's why I have to do this, because I'm the only one who can. Jake smiled at her. Take care of the fleet, Commander. You'll be a better captain than I ever was. The communication link was cut. Theknor approached Jake. His forearms crossed in what might have been respect or might have been amusement. It was hard to tell with Krell body language. I will not fight you myself, Theknor said. That would be an insult to your warrior's death. You deserve to be defeated by our future, not our past. From the crowd of warriors, one stepped forward. He was younger than most of the others, with fewer scars on his carapace, but he moved with confidence and grace. His name was Zektar, and he had been training his entire life for his first true battle. This is my finest unblooded warrior, Theknor explained. He has never killed in combat, but he has trained under the best masters. He represents the next generation of Krell strength. It is appropriate that he should face you. Jake looked at Zektar. The young Krell stood 7 feet tall with 4 powerful arms and natural armor that could probably stop bullets. His claws were sharp enough to cut through steel. His mandibles could crush bone. Jake was 5 feet 10 inches tall. He weighed about 180 pounds. He had no natural weapons, no armor, no particular physical advantages. He was just a human in a uniform. The odds were impossible. Everyone knew it. The Krell expected an easy victory. The humans watching from their ships expected to see their captain die. Even Jake knew that by every logical measure he shouldn't be able to win. But Jake had spent the last week doing something important. He had studied every recording of Krell combat he could find. He had analyzed their movements, their tactics, their strengths and weaknesses. He had learned the Krell were stronger than humans. Much stronger. They could lift massive weights, hit with tremendous force, and endure incredible punishment. But strength came with a cost. It required larger muscles, denser bones, more mass. All of that mass made them slower. The Krell were also warriors who relied on their natural advantages. They had armor plating that protected most of their bodies. They had forearms that could attack from multiple angles. They had claws and mandibles that made them walking weapons. They had spent millions of years evolving these advantages. But evolution was a double-edged sword. The armor plating that protected them also had joints and gaps where it connected. The forearms were powerful but required more coordination to use effectively. The claws and mandibles were deadly but required them to get close to use them. Humans had different advantages. Humans could run for hours without tiring. Humans could sweat to cool their bodies and maintain peak performance longer. Humans could move in ways that other species couldn't, bending and twisting with flexibility that came from having no rigid armor. And humans had one advantage that mattered most of all. Humans were creative. They didn't fight the way they were supposed to fight. They adapted. They improvised. They did whatever it took to survive. Jake removed his uniform jacket and stood in just his undershirt and pants, barefoot, unarmed, completely vulnerable. Zektar looked at him with what might have been pity. You are brave to face me, human, but bravery is not enough. I will make your death as quick as I can. Thank you, Jake said sincerely. Now come try to kill me. Theknor raised one of his arms. The challenge is witnessed. The Technora is invoked. Fight until one cannot continue. Begin. Zektar moved first, lunging forward with surprising speed for someone so large. 2 of his arms reached for Jake while the other 2 pulled back to strike. It was a standard Krell attack pattern, designed to grapple and then crush or slash. Jake didn't try to match strength with strength. Instead, he moved sideways, using his smaller size and agility to slip past Zektar's reaching arms. As the Krell turned to track him, Jake kicked hard at the joint in Zektar's knee. The kick didn't do much damage. The armor plating was too thick, but it made Zektar stumble slightly, forced him to adjust his balance. It showed that Jake wasn't going to fight the way the Krell expected. Zektar attacked again, this time using all 4 arms in a combination of strikes meant to overwhelm Jake's defenses. Jake ducked under one swing, twisted away from another, and took a glancing blow from a third that sent him spinning. Pain exploded in Jake's shoulder where the claw had caught him. He felt skin tear and blood start to flow. The wound wasn't deep, but it hurt. Jake ignored the pain and kept moving. The arena was silent except for the sounds of combat. The Krell warriors watched in fascination as the human refused to go down. They had expected him to be killed in seconds. Instead, he was still moving, still fighting, still finding ways to avoid the killing blows. Jake's strategy was simple. Don't try to hurt Zektar seriously because that was impossible. Instead, tire him out. Make him work for every attack. Force him to chase, to turn, to burn energy while Jake conserved his own. Humans had better endurance than Krell. It was one of the few physical advantages humans possessed. Jake had run marathons. He had trained in environments where oxygen was thin and gravity was heavy. He knew how to pace himself, how to keep moving long after his body screamed for rest. Zektar attacked again and again. Each time Jake slipped away. Sometimes he took hits. A claw caught his ribs, leaving long scratches. A backhand blow sent him tumbling across the arena floor. A mandible strike grazed his arm, drawing more blood, but Jake kept getting back up. He kept moving. He kept fighting. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. The watching Krell began to murmur among themselves. This wasn't how combat was supposed to go. The human should have been dead already. Instead, he was still on his feet, still dodging, still somehow surviving. Zektar's breathing grew heavier. His movements became less precise. Swinging 4 massive arms repeatedly was exhausting work, especially when none of the attacks were landing cleanly. The young Krell warrior had trained for years, but all of that training assumed his opponent would fight in a predictable way. Jake wasn't predictable. He moved constantly, never staying in one place. When Zektar attacked high, Jake went low. When Zektar expected him to retreat, Jake advanced. Nothing Jake did made sense according to Krell combat doctrine. The human was also doing something else. Every time Zektar left an opening, every time his attacks missed and his guard dropped, Jake would strike at the same vulnerable points. The joints where the armor plates connected, the softer tissue around the compound eyes, the gaps in the natural armor that protected vital areas. None of Jake's strikes did serious damage. His human hands couldn't punch through Krell armor. But they didn't need to. They just needed to hurt, to sting. To add up over time, Jake's face was bleeding. His shoulder and ribs ached where claws had caught him. His body was covered in bruises. He was tired and hurt and barely able to keep his eyes focused. But Zektar was in worse shape. The young Krell was exhausted. His forearms trembled from fatigue. His breathing came in ragged gasps. He had never fought anyone who could last this long. All of his training, all of his preparation was designed for quick, decisive battles. Humans didn't fight quick, decisive battles. Humans fought long, grinding, exhausting wars. That was their nature. That was their advantage. Zektar charged one more time, putting everything into a final desperate assault. All 4 arms swung in a pattern designed to leave no escape. It was a killing move, one that should have ended the fight. Jake saw it coming. He was too tired to dodge completely, too beaten to slip away cleanly, so he did something crazy. He stepped into the attack instead of away from it. 3 of Zektar's arms missed completely as Jake moved inside their arc. The 4th arm caught Jake in the chest, lifting him off his feet and throwing him backward. Jake hit the arena floor hard and skidded across the metal surface. But as he was thrown, Jake's hands had found purchase on Zektar's carapace. His fingers, slick with his own blood, had reached for the vulnerable spot he had been targeting all along, the soft tissue near Zektar's compound eyes. Jake's thumbs pressed into that vulnerable spot with all the strength he had left. It wasn't much. His hands were weak compared to Krell claws, but they were strong enough. Zektar screamed, a high-pitched clicking sound of pain and shock. He stumbled backward, all 4 arms reaching for his face. His vision was blurred, his eyes damaged. Not permanently, but enough to matter. Jake forced himself to stand. Every part of his body hurt. He could barely breathe. Blood dripped from a dozen wounds, but he was standing. Zektar tried to attack again, but his movements were uncoordinated now. Without clear vision, his strikes went wild. Jake dodged them easily, more easily than before. The young Krell warrior was fighting blind, exhausted, and increasingly desperate. The fight went on. Jake kept moving, kept striking at vulnerable points, kept making Zektar work for every step. The Krell warrior's movements became slower, more labored. His forearms hung at his sides, too tired to lift. Finally, Zektar collapsed. His body simply gave out. Muscles that had been pushed beyond their limits refused to work anymore. The young warrior lay on the arena floor, conscious but unable to rise, unable to continue. Jake stood over him, swaying on his feet. He looked up at Theknor on the viewing platform. The terms were victory or death, Jake said, his voice hoarse. I'm still standing. Honor the agreement. The arena was completely silent. Thousands of Krell warriors stared at the impossible scene before them. A human, weak and soft and fragile, had defeated one of their finest warriors in single combat. Teknor descended to the arena floor. He looked at Jake with new respect in his compound eyes. Then he looked at Zektar, who lay defeated but alive. "You have proven something I did not believe possible," Teknor said quietly. "You have proven that humans are not weak. That courage and skill can overcome physical disadvantage. That your species deserves respect." He turned to face his assembled warriors. "The Teknora has been satisfied. The human has won. We will honor our agreement." Jake felt his legs give out. He collapsed to his knees, unable to stand any longer. Krell medical teams rushed forward to attend to both fighters. Jake woke up in a medical bay that looked nothing like the ones on human ships. The walls were organic-looking, pulsing gently with some kind of bioluminescence. The air smelled strange, full of chemicals he couldn't identify. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was or what had happened. Then the pain hit him and everything came flooding back. The challenge, the fight, the impossible victory. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. His ribs were wrapped in some kind of bandage that felt warm against his skin. His shoulder was immobilized. His face felt swollen and tight. A Krell medical officer noticed he was awake and approached. She was smaller than the warriors, with more delicate features and only 2 arms. She clicked something that the translator in the room converted to human standard. "Do not move. Your injuries are serious but not permanent. We have stabilized you. You will recover fully in time." "How long was I out?" Jake asked. His voice was rough and his throat felt like sandpaper. 3 of your human hours. War Master Teknor wishes to speak with you when you are able." "I'm able now," Jake said, though he wasn't sure that was true. He forced himself to sit up despite the pain. The medical officer clicked her disapproval but helped him into a sitting position. She adjusted something on a nearby console and Teknor's voice came through a speaker. "Captain Morrison, you are awake. Good. We have much to discuss." "I'm listening," Jake replied. "My fleet is withdrawing from Epsilon Reach as agreed. We will fall back to our territory and open channels for peace negotiations. The Teknora has been satisfied and the Krell honor their agreements." Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. It had worked. His insane plan had actually worked. "Thank you for keeping your word. It is not your thanks I wish to discuss. It is what comes next." There was a pause. "You defeated Zektar fairly. You proved that humans possess qualities we did not recognize: courage without armor, strength without natural weapons, the ability to endure and adapt. These are warrior virtues that the Krell respect above all else." "I just did what I had to do," Jake said quietly. "That is precisely why you earned our respect. You did not seek glory or personal victory. You sought to end the war, to stop the dying. That required more courage than any battle." Another pause. "The Krell have been wrong about humanity. We saw your physical weakness and assumed you were weak in all ways. We did not understand that true strength comes from the mind and the spirit, not just the body." Jake closed his eyes. The words were almost identical to what Kate had said, but in reverse. She had accused him of being a machine without humanity. Teknor was praising him for being human despite physical weakness. Both were right in their own way. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "Now we talk. Not through weapons and death, but through words and understanding. The war is not over completely. There are still battles being fought in other sectors. But here, at Epsilon Reach, the fighting stops. We will use this as an example. A proof that peace is possible between our species." "I hope it works," Jake said. "So do I, Captain Morrison. So do I." The communication ended. The medical officer helped Jake lie back down and gave him something for the pain. As the medication took effect, Jake felt himself drifting toward sleep again. His last thought before darkness took him was that he had done it. He had set down his armor and ended the war, at least part of it. When Jake woke again, he was no longer on the Krell ship. He was in a human medical facility on the Defender. Commander Lisa Grant sat in a chair beside his bed, reading reports on a datapad. She looked tired but relieved. "How long this time?" Jake asked. Lisa looked up quickly. "Captain, you're awake. About 6 hours. The Krell transferred you back to us once they stabilized your injuries. Their medical technology is impressive. You would have been in recovery for weeks with our equipment. They had you patched up in hours. Where's the Krell fleet?" "Withdrawn, just as Teknor promised. They're holding position at the border, and they've opened a negotiation channel. Fleet Command is sending diplomats to begin formal peace talks." Lisa set down her datapad. Sir, what you did was insane. Brilliant, but insane. Did it work? The fighting has stopped at Epsilon Reach. Other sectors are following suit as news spreads. The Krell apparently take the Technora very seriously. When word got out that you won the challenge, their forces across the front lines started standing down. It's like you flipped a switch. Jake felt another wave of relief. Good, that's good. Fleet Command is calling you a hero. They want to give you medals, promotions, probably name a ship after you. The media is going crazy. Everyone wants to interview the man who ended the war with his bare hands. I don't want any of that, Jake said quietly. I just want the dying to stop, Lisa smiled. I know. That's why you're the right person for this. Anyone else would have done it for glory or recognition. You did it because it was the right thing to do. Jake was quiet for a moment. Is there any word from Kate Sullivan? Lisa's expression changed. She heard about what happened. Her transport turned around and she's on her way back here now. She should arrive in about 12 hours. Jake didn't know how he felt about that. Part of him wanted to see her, to tell her that she had been right about everything. Part of him was terrified of facing her again after what she had said. Sir, can I ask you something? Lisa said carefully. Why did you really do this? Was it just about ending the war? Jake thought about the question. Kate told me I had become a machine, that I had forgotten how to be human. She was right. I had spent so long being a soldier, being a commander, being the Iron Wall, that I forgot why any of it mattered. I forgot that the point wasn't to win. It was to protect people, to give them a chance to live their lives in peace. He looked at Lisa. I couldn't keep fighting the old way. I couldn't keep trading lives for territory and calling it victory. So I tried something different. I set down my armor. I walked into the enemy fleet as just a man, not as a weapon, and I asked if there was another way. And there was, Lisa said softly. And there was, Jake agreed. Over the next few days, Jake recovered in the medical bay. His wounds healed quickly thanks to the Krell medical treatments. His body was battered, but his spirit felt lighter than it had in years. The peace negotiations began in earnest. Thecnor insisted that Jake be part of the human delegation. The Krell wanted to negotiate with the warrior who had earned their respect, not with politicians who had never fought. Jake agreed reluctantly. He worked with the diplomats to establish the framework for a lasting peace. It wasn't easy. There were territorial disputes to resolve, reparations to negotiate, and years of mistrust to overcome. But both sides were committed to making it work. The war didn't end overnight. There were still battles being fought in distant sectors where news traveled slowly. There were hardliners on both sides who wanted to keep fighting. But slowly, steadily, the violence decreased. Ceasefires were established. Peace treaties were signed. The war began to end not with a dramatic final battle, but with a gradual return to peace. Kate Sullivan arrived on the Defender 2 weeks after the challenge. Jake was out of the medical bay by then, back to light duty. He was in his quarters when she knocked on his door. Come in, he said, his heart racing. Kate entered and stood in the doorway. She looked different somehow. Less angry, less tired, more like the woman he had fallen in love with years ago. I heard what you did, she said quietly. I'm sure everyone has heard by now, Jake replied. That's not what I mean. I heard why you did it. Kate stepped further into the room. Lisa told me about the casualty reports, about how you spent nights reading every name, every story, about how you took off your armor and refused to put it back on. Jake looked down at his hands. They were still bandaged from the fight. You were right about me. I had become something cold, something that could make terrible decisions and not feel them. I needed to remember what it meant to be human. I was wrong too, Kate said. I said you were a machine, that you couldn't feel anything. But what you did walking into that enemy fleet alone, that took more humanity than anything I've ever seen. A machine would have fought the safe way. A machine would have calculated odds and made the logical choice. Only a human would risk everything on hope. She moved closer and sat down beside him. I'm sorry for what I said. I was angry and hurt, and I wanted to hurt you back. But I didn't mean it. You're not a machine, Jake. You're the most human person I know. Jake felt tears prickling at his eyes. He hadn't cried in years. Hadn't let himself feel this much in years. I don't know if I can go back to being who I was before the war. That person is gone. But maybe I can be someone better. You already are, Kate said gently. She took his bandaged hand in hers. You showed 2 civilizations that peace is possible. You proved that courage isn't about being the strongest or the most heavily armed. It's about being willing to try the impossible. They sat together in silence for a while. Outside the viewport, the stars looked peaceful for the first time in 7 years. What happens now? Kate asked finally. I don't know, Jake admitted. Fleet Command wants me to stay in the military. The Krell want me involved in the peace process. The media wants to turn me into some kind of symbol. But I don't want any of that. I just want the fighting to be over. It's almost over. Thanks to you, not just me. Thousands of people fought to make this possible. Millions of people on both sides who were tired of the war and ready for something different. I just gave them a reason to stop fighting. Kate squeezed his hand gently. That's not nothing, Jake. That's everything. 3 months later, the formal peace treaty was signed. Representatives from the Terran Alliance and the Krell Dominion met on a neutral station and agreed to terms that would end the war permanently. Territory was divided fairly. Trade agreements were established. Cultural exchange programs were created. Jake was there for the signing, wearing his dress uniform but no armor. He stood beside Theknor as the documents were signed and sealed. The old War Master looked at him with respect. You changed the galaxy, Captain Morrison. Both our species will remember what you did here. I just gave peace a chance, Jake replied. Everyone else did the hard work of making it real. After the ceremony, Jake officially retired from active military duty. He had served for long enough. Done his part. Now it was time to let others carry the burden. He and Kate moved to a small colony world far from the front lines. They built a simple house overlooking a valley full of alien flowers that bloomed in colors humans had never seen before. They got married in a quiet ceremony with only a few friends present. Jake never put on armor again. He didn't need it anymore. He had proven to himself and to the galaxy that real strength didn't come from weapons or machines or physical power. It came from the willingness to be vulnerable, to admit weakness, to choose hope over certainty. Years passed. The peace held. The Krell and humans learned to work together, then to trust each other, then to become genuine allies. When new threats emerged in the galaxy, they faced them together. A memorial was built at Epsilon Reach, marking the place where the war had ended. It showed a human and a Krell standing together looking toward the stars. The inscription was simple, written in both languages. Sometimes the greatest warriors are those who choose peace over glory. Young Krell warriors visited the memorial and learned about the human who had challenged their strongest warrior and won without killing. Young human soldiers visited and learned about the captain who set down his armor and walked alone into an enemy fleet. The story became legend. The legend became myth. And the myth taught a lesson that both species needed to learn. True courage wasn't about never being afraid. It was about being afraid and doing what was right anyway. True strength wasn't about dominating others. It was about protecting them. True victory wasn't about defeating enemies. It was about turning them into friends. Jake Morrison lived quietly for the rest of his life. He never sought fame or recognition. He never talked about what he had done unless asked directly. He spent his days with Kate growing a garden, writing books about military history and the costs of war, and occasionally speaking to groups of young soldiers about the importance of knowing when to fight and when to seek peace. When he was old and his hair had turned gray, a young reporter asked him if he regretted anything about that day at Epsilon Reach. Jake thought about the question carefully. I regret that it took me so long to understand what really mattered. I regret all the people who died before I figured it out, but I don't regret the choice I made. Sometimes you have to be willing to risk everything to save what matters most. What matters most? The reporter asked. Jake looked at Kate, who was sitting beside him with her hand in his. The people we love. The future we're trying to build. The hope that tomorrow can be better than today. That's what matters. That's always what matters. He died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 87. Kate was holding his hand. The last thing he said was that he had no regrets. At his funeral, representatives from both the Terran Alliance and the Krell Dominion attended. Theknor himself, now ancient even by Krell standards, made the journey. He stood before Jake's grave and spoke in his clicking, grinding voice. Captain Jake Morrison taught us that the strongest armor is the courage to set it aside. He taught us that the greatest weapon is the willingness to put it down. He taught us that winning isn't about defeating your enemies, but about finding a way for everyone to survive. He was a warrior who chose peace. He was a soldier who ended a war. He was a human who showed us what humanity really means. Thecnor placed a Krell honor marker on the grave. It was made of the same material as Krell armor plating, shaped into a simple circle. It meant eternal respect. It meant that Jake's name would be remembered in Krell halls of honor forever. Kate stood by the grave after everyone else had left. She looked at the simple headstone with her husband's name and dates. Below them was a line from a letter he had written to her years ago. I set down my armor to remember what I was fighting for. I found that I was fighting for you, for us, for the chance to live in a world without war. That chance was worth any risk. She smiled through her tears. You did it, Jake. You gave us that chance. And we didn't waste it. The sun was setting over the valley, painting the alien flowers in shades of gold and purple. The wind carried the scent of growing things. Somewhere in the distance, children were laughing. It was a world at peace, a galaxy at peace, built on the foundation of one man's courage to be vulnerable, one man's choice to walk alone into the unknown, one man's belief that peace was worth any personal sacrifice. The iron wall had fallen, but what it protected still stood, and that was all that Jake Morrison had ever wanted. The story of the human who set down his armor and ended the war alone became the founding myth of the new age. It was told to children of both species. It was studied in military academies and peace institutes. It was remembered whenever conflicts arose and violence seemed like the only answer. And every time the story was told, it carried the same message. The message that had changed everything. The message that Jake Morrison had proven with his own blood and courage. Sometimes the bravest thing a warrior can do is choose not to fight. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is admit they're weak. Sometimes the only way to win is to risk losing everything. And sometimes one person willing to set down their armor and walk into the unknown can change the galaxy forever. That was the legacy of Captain Jake Morrison. Not the battles he won or the enemies he defeated, but the war he ended and the peace he made possible. The galaxy would never forget.